Good evening and welcome to the latest edition of Hobbservation Point Live. I am your host, Chuck Hobbs, and I want to say happy Labor Day weekend to each of you who has found it not robbery to sit here and watch us this evening as we go through another episode discussing the pertinent political and social topics of our day. Last week, I had my first edition of what I call the HBCU Roundtable. I had my brothers from Morehouse College. This week, I have the pleasure of having a number of sisters who are dear friends of mine from Spelman College, the #1 ranked Black college for the last 13 years and counting per U.S. News and World Report. Some of the things that we will discuss tonight will be COVID-19, the way that each of these ladies is coping with the stress of COVID-19. We will also talk about the importance of Kamala Harris's selection as vice presidential running mate for Joe Biden. I hope that we have a chance to talk about the Biden-Trump race that's coming up in the next 58 days when we go to the polls. And last, we will finish by talking about social justice this year, a topic that has been hotter than hot, especially throughout this summer. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in all of my distinguished guests. I have with me my Spelman sisters, Kenethia Jones, Alana Matthews, Ayanna Hawkins, Ursula Holmes, Joy Stevens, Candace McLaren Lanham, and Kimberly Worthy. Good evening, ladies.
Good evening.
All right, good evening. All right, Kimberly.
Good evening.
Okay, good evening, you all. Kimberly, I'd like to start off with, I know that you, about a little over a decade ago, you were named the DC Educator of the Year. I believe you were feted by the Obama-Biden administration for winning that award. And one of the things that is so critical right now is obviously as August has turned into September, schools have already started or some are scheduled to start within the next few days. And that has caused considerable angst for so many parents across the country, as well as for teachers, administrators, and staff with regards to COVID-19 and potentially being exposed to that. Kim, I want to talk to you a little bit about what are your thoughts about reopening? Have the schools across America reopened too soon? Should we be virtual right now? Just lead us a little bit with where you think we should be right now on that topic.
Definitely, I believe schools. Well, let me say this. First of all, my school has decided to open. And I'm in an interesting position. I am teaching at a private school now. And so in this position, I've been able to see all that it takes to reopen when you have resources available to you. And that is the critical determining factor. And really, I mean, I've always known that, resources are the determining factor. But now being in this position, it's heartbreaking to see the wealth gap because my school has provided testing for staff and students. All of us have been tested. We're going to be tested every 2 weeks. In addition, all of the classrooms are outfitted with cleaning stations. Our bathrooms have the UV lighting or whatever, the technology, so that the bacteria and virus is killed instantly. It's just amazing. We have everything that we need. We've all been provided with these masks and everything. So I see what's needed to feel safe, to feel like we can go back to school. And so with those precautions in place, yeah, parents feel safe, students feel safe, teachers, staff feel safe. However, when you don't have those precautions in place, and also our classrooms, we only have 12 students in our class. So we can properly distance our desks so that we can teach only 12 students. When you don't have that, no, it's not safe. It's not safe for the teachers. It's not safe for administrators. It's not safe for our students. And again, this is a wealth gap that we're seeing throughout the country, all over the country, not just in our urban communities, but everywhere. And it is, it's just, I'm seeing it now firsthand, what this country will do for those who have and those who have not.
Absolutely. And with that, Kenethia, I also wanted to bring you in on that. I know that you have an education background, and I know that you are a child advocate. What are your thoughts? Are we moving too swiftly with regards to reopening full bore across America? Should we be doing virtual learning at this time? Unmute your mic. Kenethia, there you go.
Sorry, I was off to talk. So I was a teacher for 8 years and a principal / school leader, because I was a VP for a while, for about 5-6 years. And so I think that Kim laid it out perfectly. If you have the ability to do all the things that she named, yes, I would go back in a heartbeat. However, I've spent the majority of my 25 years in urban schools where there are 30 plus kids in a classroom, where you have kids who are just being kids and who want to switch masks, right? I taught 3rd grade, and I was thinking about if I were a 3rd grade teacher right now, the heart palpitations I'd be having throughout the day, trying to manage kids, right? And I think kids being kids is whether you have or have not, there's still going to be kids doing kid stuff, right? Which is not safe half the time, pandemic or not. And so I think those folks who have taken time and been thoughtful and intentional, and who parents feel comfortable, yes, it's time to go back, right? But in spaces where that's not the case, I live in Shaker Heights, Ohio. We just started back school this week. We, being the city, just went back to school. However, it's online for the first 9 weeks. Folks are still trying to figure this out. And so I appreciate districts taking their time, particularly when you have the White House Secretary of Education saying, we all need to go back to school. Everyone needs to go back to school. Well, then people said, well, how, pray tell, do you think we should do that? And her answer, of course, was, well, we'll let the states figure that out. Well, okay. So since the onus is on states to figure it out, I feel like people are taking their time, taking the appropriate amount of time to really think about what this looks like. And so in the summer, I know schools that I was supporting, they didn't know what was next, right? They had no idea. It's hard enough to open school without a pandemic, right? That's hard enough. And so this idea of a pandemic, I think states really just need to take their time, and schools need to be thoughtful and intentional about what has to happen for them.
I appreciate that. Ayanna Hawkins, let me ask you, I know that your little girl, I believe, started kindergarten this week. Did that give you any concerns this summer as we were heading into the fall semester, how those services would be delivered, whether to allow her to go into school or to have her educated at home?
So going back to March, when they first closed the schools, I mean, we weren't clear then how long this was going to last until, of course, we got to the end of the school year. So I was very concerned going back into the school year, sending her back to school, because like you said, she's kindergarten, they're 5, they want to touch everything, they want to touch each other. And like Kenethia said, they want to, they're probably want to trade masks. She did have an opportunity to go to camp this summer, but even that was fraught with a lot of anxiety for me because she caught a cold. And that became, that also sort of added to my anxiety, because that meant that we had to get her tested. And so just the idea of her going back full time to school without there being protocols in place. And I'm in DC, so I know that DC announced midsummer that they were going to do a virtual, but it was actually right up to the last minute. So it was almost the end of July when they announced that we were going to do a virtual school year. or at least for the first semester. And then the concern right now is having the technology to support that, because not everybody has not only the technology personally, but also the school system is providing the technology to the parents, and that hasn't been provided yet. So we're still waiting on that. So all of that anxiety, concerning that, and then just, like you said, them being very young, them not necessarily understanding what's going on, because it's very difficult to explain that to children. I'm assuming 8 and under, it's going to be difficult for them to completely understand what's going on. So all of that has been a part of my anxiety. But I'm, right now I'm overworked by the, beginning of school, because it's very overwhelming. But I think at the same time, I feel a lot better that she's not going out and I'm not sending her off and then just sort of, praying that everything will be okay. So that's
Ayanna, that's real talk. And as we continue on the education piece, I want to open it up to each of you panelists with regards to just COVID-19 in general. This year has been a trip. I mean, for lack of a better phrase, the last 6 months have been nothing that any of us expected when the new year rang in back in January. So whoever wants to start off, I'll start with Ursula first, because I see she has that look on her face like she's got something that she wants to say and what have you. So I'm gonna pick on my sister. But I just want to talk about, how are you doing? How are each of you, or how is each of you coping with, or I'm sorry, I'm having grammar police issues this afternoon. I know my mom's gonna hit me in the head. How are y'all doing right now with regards to COVID-19?
Well, I think things could be worse. I mean, and I think that keeps me as grounded as possible, because I do think this is going to last for a while, unfortunately. I think my biggest concern, of course, if anyone knows me, they know I live near my parents. And this particular pandemic, of course, they're essentially stuck at home. They don't go for anything. And so now we're trying to figure out, how do we get to doctor's appointments? And will they ever be comfortable being out in public as long as this is going on? I'm always frustrated to see how people just don't want to take one for the team, so to speak. And that's so frustrating to me, because as long as the personal agendas or the personal freedoms of the individuals continue to be, I guess, the driving force for what they do, we'll have to deal with this for quite some time. And the reality is, until we take the time to actually do what we need to do to stop this virus in its tracks, because the reality is we don't know a lot about this virus. We really don't know how it's transmitted. And because of that, we're kind of hamstrung. But this is what we do know. If you're isolated, you won't get it. We know that for sure. But no one wants to do that. No one wants to be inconvenienced. And so it's just so frustrating, because people don't realize this is, whether or not you want to acknowledge that we are a community, we are. And if we can't get people to, all do what they need to do, there's no telling how long this mess might last.
That's right. Alana Matthews.
I wanted to say something other than mess.
I know, it's okay. We have a lot of time tonight, and I anticipate that you will say a bit before the evening is out. Alana Matthews, how are things out in California right now with you and your family? You're on mute, Alana.
Sorry. In the beginning, we were doing very well. We were kind of a model state. We had it under control. But then we, within a month or so, became a hotspot. So it's been very challenging, because I work with the legislature. So we are all creating the rules and working with the governor's office, having press conferences every Monday and Wednesday. For me personally, it's been challenging because my mom lives with me. And so I'm very protective about, who comes in and out of my house. But I also have 3 children who are, I have 2 now that are in college. So on the education piece, it's been a challenge figuring out, do I want to continue to pay almost $100,000 a year, when people are, they're doing distance learning. And it's just a reality that you have to confront is, am I going to be writing a check for $20,000 when my kid is having a different type of education? And so for my youngest son, he decided to take the semester off. He took off the spring semester in March and came home because we weren't sure what the environment was going to be like in Atlanta. So we brought him to California where we knew we could control kind of the safety environment. But he just decided, can I just use that money to get an apartment and move to, Southern California where I can have more chances to get internship opportunities? So I'm happy he's working with Pixar now. So that's been another challenge. And then my oldest son just decided not to come home, and he's in Michigan. So that was, a decision that he made, and I respected it. And he is being able to balance, going distance learning and then some in-person learning because he has to do labs. Me, and then just myself, like being able to cope with the sanity. There's been so much racial unrest that has really kept me busy. So COVID-19 has sort of taken a back seat because we have people, even Sacramento made the news where we had a 14-year-old that had a spit mask placed on them. And there have been several other incidents that we've had to just focus on to deal with this moment of racial reckoning.
Yes. Candace, how have you been dealing with this COVID-19 over the last 6 months? How has it impacted your family? How has it impacted your law practice? Can you shed some light on that?
Sure. I think my sisters have put it beautifully. It's been a really, really trying time for everyone. What I keep saying to everyone when they ask how I am is that I'm, we're bored, but we're blessed. Because my husband and I have been able to stay home and work from home, and my firm has not put any pressure on me to return or on any of us to return, even though the offices have slowly been opening across the country in accordance with all the jurisdictional mandates. But it's been a really rough time. Not just professionally, but personally and emotionally. And, you're obviously speaking to a group of women, all of us, thankful to be educated and relatively well off. So we're not the essential workers who are having to go and stock grocery store shelves and open up the fast food restaurant chain or clean houses. I think about those people and it's heartbreaking what people have had to endure just to survive in the midst of this pandemic, which Ursula said so beautifully, we could be so much further along in trying to eradicate it if people were not so intent on doing their own thing. And I think that is probably one of the scariest parts of the last few months for me, that has also, the pandemic has really brought to bear, is this singular myopic view that everyone has suddenly adopted, that I think in large part has been buoyed by this administration. And it has caused people to say, my rights and my rights. And suddenly people are demanding, they have the right to pizza without a mask, and they have a right to go to the bar without a mask. And they, I'm an attorney. Where is that right written? Maybe I missed that day in con law because I've never seen it. But suddenly everyone's a constitutional law expert and everyone's got a right to everything. And it's been very disheartening, personally and professionally and societally. And I think that, I'm very much hoping for new things ahead in November. And I really believe that we are going to have to shut down in order to open back up in a way that is going to be beneficial for us across the board. And that's economically and from a health perspective, because look, we talk about everyone, Ayanna, and everyone's talking about the little ones. And we know when you're trying to wrangle a classroom full of little ones, God bless the teachers out there. I don't know how the Kenithias and the Kims do it. It's not my calling. But we even saw it as campuses and universities were opening back up, and you see the videos and the pictures, and suddenly the frat houses are jammed, and the bars, everyone's shoulder to shoulder, everyone's maskless. And, you can't really blame them on one level. They've been stuck at home for so long, but then it's suddenly like all sorts of reason and rationality goes out the window. And then we're shutting campuses down, and then parents are pissed because we paid $100,000 and my kid is sitting in my living room and it's not working. This is not working. We have to do it differently, and it's not going to be done differently under this administration. And we know that. So I just keep praying that people are going to stay home but get to the polls, because I don't see any other way here.
Indeed. And I see that our Spelman sister, Monique Lynn, on Facebook comment, the psychological aspect is difficult for many folks, especially seniors. The isolation and subsequent depression is devastating for many. There are so many things to balance between physical, mental, and economic health. Joy Stevens, let's talk a little bit about that. I think, let's do this. By show of hands, how many of us have felt some level of depression since this pandemic started? And I'm gonna raise both hands because some days it's harder to get out of bed than others, right? So Joy, with that, I know you haven't had a chance to talk yet this afternoon, which is the first, but with that in mind, what are some things that you have been able to do to combat either feelings of anxiety, depression, or any other mental struggles over the last 6 months?
So let's talk about that. I kid, but not really. I've been doing that a lot. So that's part of the problem. My particular situation has been really unusual because I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And right in the middle of this pandemic, when it first started, my business shut down because I couldn't travel to different places to do my thing. And then I pivoted, started doing virtual training, and I began doing a lot of helping people cope, some different ways to manage stress, make sure you get a little sunlight, get out and walk. That gets old. We thought it was only going to happen or last, 6 weeks, maybe 2 months. We'll be out of here by April, May, June, July, August. It's September now. Don't nobody want to hear about taking a walk no more. But at the same time, because I'm a DE&I consultant, the death of George Floyd sparking all of this unrest in the United States and things that I've been trying to tell people for 15 years. Now they're like, what was that you were talking about? What is this white fragility thing you mentioned? What do you mean by binary thinking and unconscious bias? Can you explain this to us? And I have been doing that. I am book solid through the end of the year, which is a blessing. And I do admit that. But at the same time, it wears me out because I spend my days trying to get this message across as to why people are marching, decoupling privilege from wealth. Just because you didn't grow up in a mansion doesn't mean you didn't grow up with privilege. And going through that, having people share their stories. I'm hearing stories from people in corporate America, Black vice presidents, Black directors, et cetera, and they're sharing it with 200, 300 people all on a Zoom about how the police came in their house and asked their kids questions. There's nothing they can do about it. Or they got stopped, or they were just walking down the street and somebody threw a can at them and called them an N-word. We're hearing all of this and it is exhausting. And I am going to keep doing it because I want to make sure all the people who are having their eyes open right now, like I had no idea this was going on next door or in America or down the street or whatever, they're willing to listen now. And so that actually, it wears me out, but it gives me hope at the same time. So that's my personal little seesaw that I go through. But I say for anybody else, you've got to figure out what brings you peace and grab some every day, because it's enough nonsense out here to make you want to holler, right? So I am not a psychiatrist. One day maybe we'll have, I'm not sure if we have one on here right now, but I can't speak to what to do. All I know is you've got to figure out how you can balance that out and take a little, even if it's just taking a hot bath. I am the queen of a hot bath and a glass of wine. That is my therapy. So I hope everybody else can find some.
Understood. And with that, I know that we are going to speak about social justice and the instances of police brutality before the hour is up. But I want to segue right now into a little bit happier topic. Kamala Harris, our Howard University sister, sister for Alana and Alpha Kappa Alpha, a Black woman elevated to the role of potential vice president of the United States. While that was a watershed moment last month, we also are still dealing with quite a bit of backlash. I expected some of it from the right. I sensed that some of it would come from the left, particularly Black men and even some Black women. But it is still nonetheless shocking to see some of the things that I have read over the last 30 days. She's not Black. She's married to a white guy. All of these things that are so offensive, people bringing up who it is she may have dated back in the day, things that have nothing to do with her ability to perform the duties. And even the worst one, she's the police. She's a former prosecutor. let's talk about Kamala Harris a little bit. Alana, I'd like to start off with you. That's your soror, so I'm going to give you first bite, and then I want everybody to weigh in on whatever it is that you'd like to talk about her historic selection. Go ahead, Alana.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I have been following her career for me to be in California from when she was San Francisco DA. I helped campaign when she was her attorney general. And what we have to realize is that our communities are victimized, not only from a prosecutorial standpoint, but from just being victims of crimes. And so it's not that she is the police, it's just that she's law enforcement, and our communities need law enforcement. She's even said before in a speech, like, we want our grandmothers to be able to walk to the store. We want to make sure that we're able to sleep at night. And so being a prosecutor, you get the inside view and you get to see how our communities are treated when we become victims of crime. And is it the same as we look on, you know, girls who are missing or women who have been brutalized? Are Black women given the same level and treatment in the prosecutor's office that their counterparts are? Everybody is familiar with the Drug Crime Act in the era of Ronald Reagan, where between 1985 to 2000, the prison rate population, it quadrupled. And that's because who was charging more African American men for drug possessions over the counterpart? The statistics show that drug uses was about the same. The statistics show that between Black and white dealers, Black and white users, it was about the same. Yet the penalties were harsher, and not only for arrest, but in the prosecutors who were filing. So when we look at issues of equity, we see that we really do need that voice. We need a Kamala Harris to be in that position to make sure there's equity with charging, but we also need it to protect our people so that no one is just looking at a case and saying, well, hey, you know what, that happens in that community all the time. There's nothing that we can do. So that prosecutor, having a Black prosecutor, having a Black female in that position or in the office that's looking at a case from charging to trying the case and to ultimately dealing with sentencing is a very powerful position to achieve the equity that we've all been marching for and we want to see in our criminal justice system.
Hey, man, Candace, I know that you too spent a number of years as a prosecutor. How did it impact you when you saw that she was going to get the nod? What are your thoughts about her candidacy?
I mean, I was surprised, and then I was not surprised by the backlash. We saw it coming when she was running for president herself. I like a lot of what Alana had to say. I am a former prosecutor. I spent 10 years in the Manhattan DA's office in New York. I went to law school thinking I was going to be a defense attorney. And when I realized how much power the prosecutor held, I realized that we needed more of us who looked like us on that side of the aisle. And so that is the decision I made, because I saw that I could also help the community that way. And I think a lot of people lose sight of a lot of what Alana just said, that the prosecutor is the one who decides who is going to be charged, what that person's going to be charged with, whether they're going to get a plea deal, whether their defense attorney is going to get a fair hearing or a fair shake, whether the case is going to trial, and then advocates for a sentence if, in fact, that person is found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There's an enormous amount of power in the hands of the prosecutor. And if more of us are not on that side, that we cannot get true justice and equity. It's not possible. We need fierce defense attorneys to advocate for our people who are accused, because we all know that there are so many of us who are wrongly accused or whose charges have been trumped up. And because of the wealth disparity, a lot of our Black and brown men are faced with taking plea deals so they can do 10 years instead of life, 5 years instead of 25. And once you go in, it's very hard to get out and come out as the same person. But if the prosecutor is the one who's making all the decisions at the outset, that's where we also need to be. And we need people who are going to be able to look at a case when it comes in and ask the police officer, why did you stop this car? And when the police officer is unable to answer that question, you say, I'm not comfortable with this. We're not going forward. I did that a lot. I got cussed out a lot. You don't know what it's like out here. You're absolutely right. We're still not putting it through. I can't tell you how it was to have my domestic violence victims of color. I was in New York. Many of them were first generation, non-English speaking Black and brown women. I also did a lot of sex crimes in my time. And when those women would come in the office and realize that I looked like them, the feeling of relief that would wash over them, physically wash over them. It was palpable, it was visible. So there's a role for all of us here. It has to be appreciated. It has to be done with the requisite level of cultural competence and cultural intelligence. And not everyone is fit for that. And not everyone can do that, Black, white, or otherwise. I will say, I recognize obviously that Kamala was not a line assistant attorney like I was. She was the DA. So she wasn't handling individual cases. She was setting policy. And if we were to all go back and dissect her record, I don't know that I would agree with everything that she did. I don't know. But I do know that if we continue to search for the perfect candidate, we're going to continue to end up exactly where we are. And that's with the orange man, who now has people, tiki torch wielding men taking to the streets, ready to take people out on the basis of nothing. So I think we need to look beyond the title and really look at the person and what that person has the ability to offer and to do.
That's a very good point. One of the things, Candace, that I have raised over the last few months is that the Republican Party has always done a magnificent job of falling in line with their candidate, whereas the Democratic Party seems to almost each election cycle want to fall in love with the candidate. And so, you know, I can't tell you how many Republicans that step into my DMs and will tell me, Chuck, I don't want to say this out loud because you have a pretty tough crowd, but I think that Donald Trump is reprehensible as a human being, but he advocates the ideas or the ideals that I advocate. And so I'm supporting Donald Trump. And I just sit there sometimes and shake my head. I'm like, okay, well, if that's what floats your boat, that's fine. But I shake my head from the standpoint of, if we can only get Democrats to coalesce in the same type of way, to understand that there are a lot of things about Joe Biden I might not like. There may be some things policy-wise about Kamala Harris I might not like. But at the end of the day, they line up with more of my values than the Trump-Pence ticket. And so with that, they have my support. Kenethia, I want to go to you, then I'm going to step to Ursula with regards to the same question, the impact of Kamala Harris's selection as the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party.
So I'll go back to my days, again, as a teacher and as a principal. The number of young Black women, students, children that I had in front of me, and that for the first time, I was the first person many of them had seen in a leadership role, blows me away. I don't remember Shirley Chisholm outside of like reading about it, like in my dad's books. I don't remember that. I didn't get to see that, right? So for young Black girls to be able to see a woman who looks like them, who has a long, funny name, like Kenethia, you know, to be able to see yourself, I sometimes giggle at what I think I could have been had I had this image. And I didn't do too bad, right? And so when I think about my niece, who's 7 years old, being able to see, you know, Kamala and what she can do for this country and see herself in that, light skin, long hair, that's something powerful. And so from an educator standpoint, that is, I am overjoyed that our girls are seeing women who are doing what needs to be done in this country and paving the way for them to be able to do it. Unfortunately, I knew where we were headed, right? With the misogynistic conversation, the race jokes, all of that stuff. I just remember even a post, I think, kind of circling around Facebook, where many of us were like, all right, Black women, like, don't get distracted. We know what they're about to say. We know what they're about to call her. And so let's get the sisters and the brothers lined up now to say, not on our watch. And so I was super clear on my own personal social media. Don't come here with that. None of it. And so I think that is, again, you know, just how I protect who I am, right? Because that's me up there. And so you're not going to talk about me like that. And you're certainly not going to do it to her. We just have to expect better, demand better, but I expect better off the top. Just that we treat this woman with respect.
Indeed. Ursula, jump in.
I like Kamala Harris because she's qualified. Imagine that.
Amen.
We're talking about a woman who, first of all, went to Howard University, pledged the first chapter of the first sorority for Black women, who went on to UC Hastings, which is a top 25 law school, where she was president of the Black Law Students Association. We're talking about someone who passed the California bar and has been a practicing attorney or a licensed attorney for 30 years. We're talking about someone who made the decision to become a public servant because she's either been a DA or the attorney general or a senator her entire career. So she's qualified. You know, a lot of people want to talk about Joe Biden and the crime bill. They want to talk about her prosecutorial history. Well, we need to do some reforms. Who better to do that than a former prosecutor? She knows the ins and outs of it. You know, for too long, we have people making decisions about things that they have absolutely no subject matter expertise in. And for the first time, we actually have an opportunity to have someone in that role that can actually do something, who can actually look at this particular legislation or look at how things are being done now and can say, nope, that won't work, and this is why. We don't have that now. We have a reality show host right now, and someone who is just completely unwilling to let the people who do have the subject matter expertise weigh in. He doesn't, and if they say something that's contrary to what he wants them to say, they're done. And so, I mean, it's just so difficult to, the one that kills me the most, Chuck, is the Joe and the hoe.
Yeah.
And I found that incredibly interesting, considering the fact that the person who holds the highest office in the land has what, 3 baby mamas, 5 kids, paid off a porn star, caught on tape talking about grabbing women's, you know, but she's the hoe. Really? So, I mean, is that just the general description of any Black woman who, you know, period, in life? I mean, is that how it's going to be? You know, because what she is more than anything is qualified. She's qualified to be president. She actually knows what the Constitution says. You know, so she would definitely make a very good vice president.
I totally agree. So, Kimberly Worthy, I can see by the look on your face. How did it hit you when Kamala Harris was tapped to become the vice presidential nominee? Kim, unmute your mic. Thank you.
Okay. I'll say this. I'm from Washington, D.C., born in 74. That means I grew up here in the 80s and the early 90s in Washington, D.C. I still know them, knew a lot of people that sold drugs when I was in high school. Some of my friends in my neighborhood were shot when I was growing up. And I was even raped when I was 15. And the person that raped me reached out to me last year by email. He's in prison in California. When people talk about what Kamala did and how upset they are, I wonder if they, or how closely related they are to these communities that they speak of, or if they just pontificate on Facebook and just gripe about her history and her policies. I wonder if they know people know how these crimes, violent crimes, affect people and communities and families, and how they impact people for a lifetime. Because what Kamala did was address the violent crimes immediately, but then she also put in place ways to prevent them, because her policies didn't just stop at arresting and imprisoning people. She actually put in place ways to prevent, and the crimes went down. But I don't hear people talking about that. And those are the types of reforms that we need around the country.
Amen, Kim. And Kim, I thank you for being so open to discuss what happened to you when you were 15 years old. I hate that for you. As a Black man, I have often said that these things happen far more than many of our people are willing to admit, both in our homes, sometimes with family members and things of that nature. And that is what has disgusted me to my core over the last 30 days, when I have seen the negative attacks of Kamala Harris, calling her a whore or a hoe by Black men. Comments that they would not make about their mother, well, most of them wouldn't, or their sister. Guys who would be willing to kill you if you said that about their wives or their daughters are out here promulgating the same mess. And I think that's why we have to push back against that narrative. And again, I want to thank you, Kim, for being that open with us as well as with your my listeners. And I want you to know that we love and support you. With that in mind, Joy, I want to ask you a question. How have you been dealing with the ashy folks who are coming on your Facebook page or others with much of the same foolishness that Kim was just speaking about? She must be the police, she's locking brothers up, without ever acknowledging that maybe some of those that were getting locked up needed to be locked up, or the ones that are being locked up are terrorizing Black people. They never want to balance the equation with that. How's that hit you?
There's so many different types of trolls that come on my page. Some people are genuinely ignorant. I got no problem educating somebody that wants to hear and wants to understand, even though it could be something that you can Google. It's something that I probably said yesterday, but I will answer your question if you really want to know. I have no problem engaging in intelligent discourse. It's the ones that come in and say, I'm just stating facts, you're being emotional, and their facts are memes from Fox News or a picture dedicating a quote to someone who never said it, because I already did the research and I know they didn't say that. So I try to protect my peace and getting into this with a lot of people, but there is that faction, and I've seen it. I've even seen it from some of my Morehouse brothers, which is extremely disturbing to me, that Kamala Harris is a traitor and she's locking brothers up and she's not really in, she's fake, like all these different things. Since when is being able to read a prepared speech fake? That's called being prepared. And it bothers me so much to see them pick at any little thing that she does. And I've even seen some of them say, they are supporting the current administration. They want him to stay. And I'm like, I went to school with you. We were there freshman year. My freshman year was the Rodney King riots. We were there. How can you have been there and be here now with what you're saying to me? It drives me nuts, so I do get a little emotional. I do try to run it down for them, like, this is what you're saying. This is how conflicted what you're saying is. This is how crazy you sound. Can't save them all. But I do feel like, every day I get up and I charge at that windmill one more time just to see if I can get one more, because it's going to come down to that. It's going to come down to every single vote, especially in Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Michigan. It's going to come down to everybody having to, vote for the safety of us all. That's what I really think. I'm not even being dramatic. That's what I really think is coming down to. And yeah, but to answer your question, either we can talk or you can get off my page. Those are your options at this point.
I like that. Yeah, I have a lot of people that have been banished from my page. Trust me, and there will be far more over the next 58 days. Ayanna, I know that you've been patient, and I know that as a mother of a young daughter, that this hit you in some type of way also, to be able to see Kamala Harris elevated to the position that she is in now. What are your feelings?
So I have several feelings. So first of all, I think back to how I felt in 2016, right around this time, where she was about 1.5, and so I was very excited, and we got our little pantsuits together, so we were ready. And then, of course, we got the disappointment election night, and so we have struggled, or soldiered on through the last 3.5 years. And so at this point, what is exciting to me, and also I guess hopeful, is that not only will she get an example of seeing another woman of color, a Black woman, and seeing someone like her mom, but also seeing the return of values and respect, just human decency. Because over the last 3 years, I mean, you just think about the last 3.5 years, the discourse has just been horrible. People say all kinds of things. There are all sorts of behavior that just seems to be acceptable because if the president does it, then people mimic that, and people seem to think that that is appropriate and acceptable. So all of that, and that alone sort of will be a relief for me, just to see that go away. I mean, it won't go away, but certainly see that be de-emphasized in the public discourse. And I just want to go back and just say one other thing about Kamala that always sort of struck me. Kamala went to law school about 10 years ahead of me, and I was in law school in the mid-90s. And I keep thinking, and I keep trying to tell people that when we went to law school in that time period, this was a transitional phase for, first of all, law schools were trying to get used to having people of color come in record numbers or in significant numbers, first of all. And then secondly, the path that we had in terms of career trajectories were very limited. There were very few of us that were going into law firms. There were very few of us that were going into public service beyond sort of going into the prosecutor or to the defense, or into the defense side. So there were very limited avenues for us other than government service, civil rights. And so for me, this should be the path, and we should see this path go forward. This should be, it's exactly the same path that, as far as I'm concerned, I think Joe Biden also followed a very similar path. People come out, they go, they choose these careers, and they follow this particular path. So all of this is part of it, possibly is a lack of understanding about the changes within the legal community, the changes in terms of opportunity, but just the idea that this is exactly what we were supposed to be able to do. This is what the 90s, in terms of us coming to school and us going through this, was about. This is what we were told we were supposed to be able to do once we got this advanced education. We're supposed to be able to follow these steps and go towards the next level in terms of our careers. So this entire backlash to me is exactly the same as what we saw with Barack Obama, where people questioned whether or not he was qualified. And it's like, no, this is what you said we're supposed to do. We're supposed to go to school. We're supposed to get that graduate degree, and we're supposed to see ourselves go in the same trajectory that our white counterparts. So in that sense, I mean, for me, I see her following a path that I hope that if my daughter doesn't follow it, it doesn't matter. But the fact is that she sees that it's possible. And that
Ayanna,
alone is,
I was feeling every
exciting
comment that you just made. And I also want to add real quickly that when we were in law school in the 90s, and I was down at the University of Florida College of Law, one of the things I remember is that there also was, that was the first era during our time and the 10 years prior, that women were starting to almost dominate the entering classes at these schools. And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't point that out, that not only was that different because so many professors who we had been around in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so not only were they getting used to having to deal with more minority students, but they were having to get used to dealing with women who were sitting in those seats for the first time too. The second thing is I remember when I was a young prosecutor, there was a county judge here in Leon County who absolutely berated one of my colleagues in the state attorney's office so bad that she just broke down crying. I mean, just totally ripped her to shreds in front of the jury because there was a situation where an officer who was supposed to show up for her trial did not show up. He was upset and he berated her and she just boohoo cried. And I remember sitting there thinking, because it wasn't my trial, I was in the front row. You know how it is when you're a young prosecutor and you're there encouraging I was sitting there thinking she is better than I am, because I would be held in contempt right now, because not only would I have cussed him out, I probably would have approached to try to get my hands on him with the way that she talked to the way he talked to her that day. With that, I want to segue, ladies.
Chuck, you know Chuck, you know the song "In Jail Without Bail" is
that would have been the boy, right?
Yeah.
Because I was sitting there like my head cocked, like, wow, he's really gonna
locked up. They won't let me out. They won't let me out.
Exactly. And so, with that in mind, ladies, that's a perfect time to segue into the last subject for this evening, which is social justice. We've kind of touched on it a little bit in some of the comments, but this has been another banner year, but a banner year in the wrong way. Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, here in Tallahassee, Florida, Tony McDade, Michael Johnson. There have been bodies dropping seemingly every week. Every week there is another hashtag, and it is changing so much in the way we deal in this country. So I want to start off, whoever wants to talk first, let's talk social justice. Let's talk about what you're seeing with the NBA, the NFL, the college students who are even boycotting and what have you based on social justice. How has this year impacted each of you? Who wants to start off?
Let me start. Okay. Because for me, it kind of all goes back to voting, Chuck. I was sitting here looking at a few things, not just about the Breonna Taylor case, but kind of all of the police brutality cases we've seen over the past few years. And, you know, there's a whole lot of hoopla about the fact that the police officers have not been charged. And in all likelihood, they won't be charged. But see, that all goes back to voting. Because if those police officers aren't being charged, it's because of what's on the books for Kentucky's law. And what people don't realize is that there are so many protections in both state and federal law for police officers. It's virtually, I mean, it has to be the most egregious conduct to even get to a point where you could either be successful at charging them and convicting them criminally, or even finding them liable civilly. I was looking at a few cases because typically if you have a civil action against a police officer, it's under a particular code. It's 42 U.S.C. 1983. And that is one of the most difficult standards in law that I've ever dealt with, period. And it's getting harder and harder. And what's even worse is, even though it's a federal law, the different circuits interpret the standards differently. So what might happen in Kentucky won't necessarily happen in Tennessee, won't necessarily, and it could be different in Florida, it could be different in California. It's going to be different because they're different circuits. And so people don't understand how all of this stuff kind of works together, right? So, you know, when we start talking about things like the presidential election, well, that's important because the president appoints federal judges. Donald Trump has appointed over 25% of the current acting federal judges. 25%. He's on track to outpace every president in history. And so if his appointees are those that are making the decisions about what, because this is what typically happens especially in those civil cases. As soon as that action is filed against that police department, those police officers, the attorney has to deal with a motion to dismiss. And the judges that are making those decisions right now, 25% of them are people who were appointed by Donald Trump. So you already know what's going to happen. You already know what's going to happen. I was looking at a case, a U.S. Supreme Court case recently, because apparently there was a case in 2010 in California, and a lot might be familiar with it, in LA County. The victim's name was Mendez. I can't remember what Mendez's first name was, but he was in a shed with his girlfriend The police break into the shed or bust into the shed. He picks up a BB gun. They see the BB gun and they shoot him 14 times. And remarkably, he's still alive. And they shot his girlfriend once in the back. I think he lost his leg as a result of all the gunshot wounds. And it went to trial, and he was awarded $4 million. They appealed to the Ninth Circuit. Ninth Circuit upheld the judgment, but the U.S. Supreme Court reversed it. And what struck me most about that was what happened in 2010. The U.S. Supreme Court reversed it in 2017. So if we're waiting for justice from judges, we'll be waiting a long time.
It simply is not going to happen. Yeah.
It's not.
I cut you off.
So we need to be a little bit more innovative about how we deal with the things that are impacting our community. And the things that the places that we think we're going to be able to look in order to get some relief, government, the presidency, that's not where it's going to come from. It's going to come from community-based and community-rooted efforts. And that's the beginning and end of it.
Indeed. Joy, Breonna Taylor was killed almost 6 months ago. No one has been arrested for her murder yet.
So, Chuck, can I? No.
I hear somebody. Who is that? Alana?
I think it's
Alana, go ahead. You have the mic, Alana. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties. Joy, jump in on that until we get Alana's mic squared away.
Sure thing.
So that goes back to. Okay.
Yes, I can hear you now. Alana, we can hear you.
You can hear me now? Are you? Okay.
Yes.
So I was going to say with Breonna Taylor, that goes back to Kamala Harris. So whoever elected that DA in Kentucky, you see how or whoever did not vote in that election, that's what it results in. But to pick up what Ursula talked about what we can do, one of the things I'm working on here in California is creating a new police accountability model, because qualified immunity is just a huge doctrine that is so hard to overcome with those civil rights lawsuits against police officers. So this new accountability model is demanding that police officers be required in your jurisdiction to get personal liability insurance, because clearly the moral argument, the humanity in our people has not been winning over changing police reform or creating police reform. So now let's look through it through the lens of funding and monetary. And most of your local city budgets, county budgets, 40 to 60% is going to law enforcement. And that includes bad behavior payments that are paid out. That doesn't come to what's allocated for police salaries and training and getting all this militarized vehicles. It comes from the general fund. So what should be going to hospitals or schools is now going to the police department. So now let's take away that funding that's going to police officers and put it in schools, put it in job trainings, put it towards resources that go to the root cause of what crime is. And then let's start making the police officers have some skin in the game, because your local municipality, they're the ones that are absorbing that. So the police, the city council, or the county supervisors, they can pay for general liability insurance. But every time an officer has an instance, if he's not able to be fired, then his premium goes up. And so maybe we will price them out of being able to be a police officer instead of waiting for justice. So that's something that people can advocate for right now, because the way the system is set up, you have qualified immunity, and then you have the powerness or the over involvement of police unions. So even when a police chief may want to get rid of a bad officer.
Good point. Joy, now you go ahead, Joy.
You know, I love everything that Alana just said. And I also think another add to that would be what I would like to call, anti-Karen legislation. So where is the accountability for all the excessive phone calls to the police, the trumped up excuses for calling? I saw one down in South Florida when I was there. This guy called the police on a woman who was riding her bike on a bike trail. And the message he gave the cops was, I think she's looking for open garages. So, you know, you think about all the people where something started because somebody called the police. The police have to respond because they've been called. So you add that accountability to people where it's a fine that's high enough to make it punitive, where, you know, you get caught out there fabricating stuff or calling them for no reason, and now that's in your pocket. I think that also helps from the other end to slow down just the sheer number of vague and erroneous and punitive, you know, Becky in the Park type of calls. Think about Tamir Rice. You know, I heard the 911 caller that called in, and he said there's a kid in the park. He's playing with a gun. It could be a toy gun. I'm not sure, but you know, I don't think he should be in the park. You send somebody, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't want that kid to die, but he also could have minded his business. It's an open carry state, and had he not called, Tamir might be alive right now. But this idea of police and Black bodies, I don't like what I see, I'm going to call the police to handle what I don't want to have in my eyesight. If we can cut down on that, again, that adds to the easing of this burden on the police, because they are out there, some of them trying to do their job, but it also keeps them in their lane, so to speak, and keeps more of us alive on the other end. I saw one where a guy they called the cops on him for walking down the street with his hands in his pockets in December. Think about that. All of this just being alive while Black could be cut down if there were more repercussions for people calling with erroneous or false reports. And it may even give, I'm being jaded here, but even if it gives the police force another source of funding to want to call out these people who are wasting their time, without, you know, it becomes another thing like getting a speeding ticket, but now you got a fake call fine. You know, let's do that. I'm not sure if it's legal. I'll leave it to the lawyers, but that would be my idea.
That's a good idea. I like that. Call it Karen's Law. And I'm still trying to figure out when we switch from Becky to Karen, but that's for another show. But Candace, go ahead and jump in.
But Chuck, this is the issue.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is the issue, though, Chuck. This is Ursula. And this will be quick. None of this legislation. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Chuck? Okay. None of this legislation will ever happen with the people that are currently in the legislature. None of it. None of the states, it's not happening, because right now, you know what these states are passing? They're passing laws so you can't sue your employer if you contract COVID because you came to work. They're passing that kind of legislation. They're looking for other ways to add even more protection to police officers. That's what they're working on. You know, in Tennessee, there's now a law on the books that if you protest and stay overnight on state property, it's a felony. Okay. And it's a felony because if you get convicted of a felony, then you can't vote. So that's what these legislatures are doing. And they can do that because we don't vote in legislation. We don't vote in these elections. When it's state representative and state senator time, we don't vote. You know, we barely vote when it's president, when it's a presidential election. We don't vote midterm elections. We can't connect the dots, but these are the dots. You know, I remember looking at Ferguson's voter turnout right after Michael Brown, and it was less than 30%. And there was all this uproar about the fact that the police officer wasn't charged. Okay, well, the person who makes that decision is an elected official, and you didn't even bother to go vote. So that's why I know everybody is tired of me talking about voting on my page, but that's why I talk about it, because that's the power we have, and that's the power we won't use.
Amen. Candace, social justice.
I just have to echo what my sisters have said. We have to use the power we have. A lot of us feel powerless. I was so heartened by all the people of all the different hues that took to the streets in the wake of the murder of George Floyd. And, there's talk now about whether some of our allies have grown tired, whether other, Trumpians are hijacking the movement, perpetrating like they are protesters, doing stuff they're not supposed to be doing to bring bad press. We want to do. You see people in the streets, they want to do. But we're still not taking advantage of what we can do so easily, which is vote. And it struck me. I saw on Twitter about a week ago, there was a reporter was talking about a string that was going around. Something had gone viral where people were angry at Benjamin Crump, the attorney who is representing a lot of the families who have fallen victim to police brutality, and somehow getting on him and saying he's not doing his job because these families are not seeing justice, and the police in Breonna Taylor's case haven't been arrested. And I just had to scratch my head. I said, this is not this man's role. This man is a civil attorney. He's advocating for these families. He's not a legislator. He's not an elected official. It blew my mind how confused some of us seem to be about the system and what we can and cannot do within the parameters that have been set. But the one thing we can do is vote and Google and read up a little bit on these candidates, on these judges, this brother, because it's a brother who's responsible now for reviewing and possibly bringing charges in that Breonna Taylor murder. And we see him, he was at the Republican convention. He was taking pictures with Trump. He got engaged the other day. How do I know that? Because it was all over social media. So he doesn't seem real pressed to hold her killers accountable. And he's there because he got elected to that position. So if we continue to allow these people to slide through, who are able for the next several years to make significant decisions about how we as a people and as a community and as a society are treated, to then turn around and gripe and complain about how we are being treated, we really have to start looking in the mirror. And we know that right now it could not be more important than to get to these polls and to educate ourselves. My sister Ursula has dropped some knowledge today. She is a walking encyclopedia with the amount that we have at our fingertips with Google. And we had encyclopedias when we were growing up, right, ladies? We all remember that. The type of research you can do in a matter of 5 minutes is amazing. Educate yourself, learn what the roles are, learn who these people that are vying for your votes are, and learn why people are trying to take your vote. There's a meme out there on Facebook. If your vote wasn't so important, everyone wouldn't be trying to suppress it, right? So they don't want you to have it. Why don't they want you to have it? Because these are the decisions you can help make. We have to make them now. The time is now. It's too late. It's practically too late. So we have to do it now.
Indeed. We're going to go Kenethia, then Kimberly, and then Ayanna, you will take us out on social justice. Go ahead, Kenethia.
So I think there's something to be said for education, right? And its role in a lot of what Ursula and Candace and Alana and Ayanna have said, right? Part of the miseducation of Black and brown folks is ensuring that they aren't learning this, right? Or that it's so dry and so boring that our kids are not tapped into it. And so I think teachers are amazing people. I used to be one. However, when we look at the way this administration is now thinking about further sanctioning the miseducation of people, period. The fact that he has threatened to, I think yesterday, President Trump threatened to look into whether or not California was actually instituting the 1619 curriculum, right? So this idea about trying to pretend that what's happening is a figment of an entire people's imagination. It is the work of the wheel of media and all these other things is absolutely ridiculous and asinine. However, it is clear that those of us who are educated, those of us who are educators, have a role in ensuring that children are learning very differently than we have in the past. And so for me, this whole idea of COVID-19 and a pandemic and all of this, there is a larger picture to this that says stop. And there are people who are not stopping, right? There are people who are continuing to go on. But for those of us who have stopped and took a moment to take inventory of where we are in our lives, of where we are not, and where we want to be, and how all of this is directly connected to the further brutalization of Black people and brown people and poor people, this stuff is nothing new. I was reading some of Martin Luther King's work and I was like, wait, so this is the same stuff. It just has a different hue. It has, and it just looks a little different. So I was in the school in the 90s too. And yes, I was trying to do what I could to get out there and fight the good fight. But I found myself in a place where I realized, actually, I'm almost participating in some of this stuff. And so part of it is that we've got to think about, one, re-educating people around the vote and what that looks like, feels like, sounds like, because a whole lot of people didn't know if you commit a crime, a federal offense, you can't go and vote. A whole lot of people had no idea, right? And then this idea that, well, it doesn't affect me anyway. Yes, it does. And so how do we, even in our own hidden curricula of as educators, make sure that our children have access to the information about who they are and about what all of this means for them as they watch this stuff play out on the national stage? These children are not sitting there like nothing is happening. They are angry. Some of these kids in the street are angry because they're like, this is ridiculous. How did we get here? And so part of it is that I don't think we've done a good job of educating our children. We just have not, about what it means to be in this country and what it means to be a part of this country and how you can actually generate change.
Amen. Kimberly Worthy, Kimberly Russell just made a comment about preaching to the choir and the need for us to make sure we go get cousin Jimmy from the family reunion who doesn't have formal college graduate education, and make sure that cousin Jimmy understands why he must do due diligence on these candidates. With respect to that comment, Kim Worthy, what are your thoughts on how we go about making it plain, not just social justice, but also the importance of tying social justice into the candidates that we vote for, not just for president, but down ticket with the state's attorneys, the district attorney races, sheriff's races, and things of that nature? How do we make that plain, Kim? Kim, unmute. All right. It's okay.
This is hard, Chuck, because when we look at the data, and now I'm bringing it down to scores, reading scores for elementary, middle school, high school. If I'm looking at Baltimore, right? Baltimore's dropout rates and reading score rates are just abysmal, right? We're doing a poor job. And if we're not doing what we should be doing for our kids, and they have access to guns, they have access to drugs, and so on and so forth, and then we talk to them about, they're 18 years old and we're talking to them about voting, there's a disconnect there. And so we have to do a better job with our schools. We have to do a much better job with our schools. And that's the key to solving these problems that we have in our society. We can talk about policing and so on and so forth, but it's the schools that's really the determining factor for changing the gap that we see in our equity issues. And we're not doing a good job at that at all. And that's where I see the issue is. And so when we're talking to the average Joe Smo about you know, our politicians, they can't really relate like middle class, upper middle class folks can, because we're missing the mark with them. And you know, this is my second year in this private school, but for 20 years I was in inner city schools, and we're not providing the inner city communities proper health care, proper housing, education. And so there's a sort of apathy towards voting because they don't feel like their needs are being met. And so why vote? Why vote? But what I would do when I was teaching in the inner city schools, though, I was a middle school teacher all those years. Now I'm in high school. I taught social studies. I taught history. I taught our history before slavery. So they knew who we are and our legacy. And I also taught constitutional law. So I would teach them the Constitution. I would teach them the Bill of Rights, so they know their rights. If they were ever stopped, they would, you know exactly what to do, know their rights. I made sure our students knew I had them doing Dr. Pettisco's briefs, but they would do them. They were excellent at it as well. But but I definitely taught our students our history, U.S. history, and our place and our duty to vote. However, I was not disillusioned, because I know when they left my school, I knew the community, I knew where they were going afterwards, and I knew a handful would be okay. But in DC, just last week, a young man was killed by the police, and he went to my school. He's 18 now. But I saw a video today that was posted, and he was waving his guns. That's how the police caught him. He was showing off on Instagram, playing around with his guns. And then they went around the corner in the alley, shot him up. So, we do so much, but then what does the society offer these students who don't have the skills, and yet they do have access to guns and so on and so forth. And so they grow up without these skills that they need to make it in our society. And then we want them to vote. What are they voting for? Really, in DC?
And Chuck, if I can interrupt very quickly, when we think about Kim and I aren't the lion's share of the teachers in urban schools either.
Yeah.
We are not the people who are filling these classrooms having conversations with our children. We are not the lion's share of the people who are going into education because we believe that teaching is what needs, that's the bedrock for our people anymore. That's not our work. There was a time when teaching was a highly esteemed position in our community. That is no more. And that's fine. But part of what we have done is walked away from ensuring that our children see us even in that space as they are formulating their executive function is shaping and all of those things. They're not seeing us, and they're not hearing you can do it. They're hearing all the stuff that you ever heard when you had the worst person who told you couldn't, or who said you ain't never gonna be because your mama blah, 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 because they had the whole family in the classroom. So there's a lot of work that we need to take a step back as a community and think about where we choose to ensure that we have presence, because that presence, like Candace said very early on, is power. There is power. I had a great deal of power as a teacher and a Black female principal. I still dealt with all of that stuff, the misogynistic conversation, all of that stuff. But there was still power when those 13-year-old boys looked into my face and I said, stop. And they did.
Amen.
Because they knew behind that was some love and some care for them, right? There was some, that's like my mama, that's my auntie over there.
Amen. It's like I saw a meme, and I'm usually not one that likes to quote memes, but I saw a meme that basically said that Karen, like we were talking about earlier, is teaching your child. And so that hit me in the gut real hard, because you do realize that some of the same types of people who are calling the police on us are the ones who are referring our children to the principal's office and or trying to recommend them for, you know, slower classes, when in reality they're actually bright, but they don't have a teacher who's actually telling them, boy, sit your butt down, or girl, hush your mouth, pay attention, get this lesson. So I'm right there with you. Ayanna, we're coming close on time. Take us out.
Okay. Well, I wanted to close out by saying that I feel everything. My mother was an educator. Actually, I come from a family of educators. But I also think that in addition to the school, we also need to look back at where we in the community, like Kanithia said, where else in the community can we fill in those gaps? Because we know that there are gaps that are not coming out of the school system. They're not getting this civics education. They're not getting the support or the foundation that they need. Where else? What other institutions in our community can fill that gap? So first of all, I speak from the position of doing social justice from my church. You know, so the church has to step up and take back that position that we took in the 60s. A lot of the movement that we, in terms of the organizing in the 50s and 60s, came out of the church. We have to reclaim that position. That is the point, you know, not the point, but certainly the role that the Black church played. We have to look at our institutions and our organizations that we're all a part of. I don't know how many, I think most of us are part of Greek letter organizations. We're not just formed just to sort of be a part of our college community. We continue our community service outside of our college careers. It's a lifetime of service. That means that we have to get back into our organizations and start going back into possibly into the schools, into community centers, or to meet people where they are, to bring that message to them about their, not only their civic engagement, their public responsibilities, but just sort of reinforcing this notion that this is how we go from this point to the next point in society. And then if we are reinforcing that, and then we also start early. I did want to mention that. We don't start telling people that it's important to vote when they're in high school. We have to start teaching our kids that from a very early age. They have to see us. We have to take our children with us to the polls. They have to see that process starting as early as possible. I mean, I took my daughter with me to the polls when she was young. I took her, you know, I take her with me when I volunteer. And that point is for her to see that voting is something that you do. This is a part of your civic responsibility. And I think that if we just start early, and I think that if we all recognize that it's not just someone else's job to reinforce social justice or to reinforce these messages, is all of our job. The same way it used to be. All of us lived in the same community. They saw us as examples. Let's go back and let's make sure that we're all, you know, participating in that process starting early on.
Amen. And I want to thank you ladies for agreeing to be on the first Spelman Roundtable, the first, but certainly not the last. Again, I created this platform for the purpose of being able to highlight my brilliant friends across the country who hail from historically Black colleges and universities. So I've started with home, Morehouse College, Spelman College, and eventually next week or the week after, I'm going to have a roundtable with Florida A&M University, and I hope to also hit other HBCUs, because I know some bad people across this country who are doing some powerful work in their communities and are just some brilliant lights. And so, ladies, I thank you for that. And I want to thank each of you who tuned in this evening for this very important talk. I remind that we are only 58 days away from Election Day. So make sure that you have everything that you need to be able to vote. Make sure that you have your ID straight. If you can, vote early, because the shenanigans are going to start right on schedule within the next 4 to 6 weeks. And we want to make sure that every vote counts and that your voices are heard. I hope that you have a great rest of the Labor Day weekend. And again, I look forward to speaking to you next week on Hobbservation Point Live. Have a good evening.